Tony's going to talk to us today about starting a brewery and at another location, thousands of miles away in a big city versus, Petaluma. So, Tony, here it is.
Thanks. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Are there how many people in the audience are brewers? Yeah. Okay, so you guys all know what it takes to get one brewery up and going, all right? So I guess I just made some notes. I thought I'd just walk through basically what our experience was of building that second brewery. Just for statistical, kind of information, the brewery in Chicago is it's a 300,000 square foot building. It's 6 acres under a roof. It's a giant cube. It's not a building like we all deal with here so often, where you have hallways, and I'll try not to overdrive that. This is just one big open space. It was originally a fabricated steel parts warehouse. They would store steel plate, 20 by 10 steel plate, an inch thick. I-beams, a C-channel, everything you can ever imagine that it would take to put up a skyscraper. And this was the warehouse that a lot of the buildings in Chicago were built out of all the way through the 60s and 70s and 80s. Finally, in '97, the building was decommissioned when the company was sold to private equity. And the first thing private equity does is what private equity does is start to squeeze. And so they closed the plant. They closed that plant down, which left it there for a fella that came along a little bit after us to turn it into a series of movie sound stages. So one building of which we were able to claim for our own. So just to kind of walk through it. The first thing that happened when I got to Chicago is you want to meet with the city. You want to meet with the entity that you're going to go there and engage with, because they're going to be your most important partner by every measure. But when we went to do it, we did it with a little bit different take than many businesses. It wouldn't matter if it was Boeing or IBM or even some craft breweries. We went there with the idea that we were going there to chew our own food, and that the business case for building the brewery there, we wouldn't do it if it didn't make sense, and we didn't need subsidies to get that done. Nonetheless, when the first meeting with Rahm Emanuel and a couple of his lieutenants, the first thing they wanted to do was talk about TIF grants, these tax increment financing, whatever, and all of these different sorts of incentives that they have in place for attracting businesses to the city. The thing that was different for us is we already decided that's where the fucking brewery was going to go. There was no like, well, what if we put it in Wisconsin? Well, gosh, what could you offer us? I knew that I wanted it to be in Chicago because that brewery was going to ship beer into Canada and to Europe and places beyond, and I didn't think that anybody really knew where Eau Claire, Wisconsin was. I didn't think anyone knew where LaGrange, Illinois was. But when I put the Chicago, Illinois on the label, people all over the world would know exactly where that was at. And that meant something to me. It meant a lot to me. Again, it's part of branding in a way of thinking. What does it say on the label? It tells people about who you are. Anyway, So we went there with the idea that we were going to do it, and we turned down all the incentives down. And when I was talking with Steve Koch, who's the deputy mayor there, and I said that we don't want these incentives, there was just this blank look on all of their faces. It was not the thing they expected to hear. But what I did was I turned the gun around. I was like, I'm giving you that money back, all right? What I would like instead, in return for not taking this money, which is of a limited dimension, and you go spend it on people's businesses where the business would not happen, were it not for these incentives, and instead provide me with a lubricated process. And that was worth, it wouldn't have mattered if the city had given us $15, $20, $30 million. That lubricated process was worth twice that in expedience of building, processes, getting things through the fire department, getting the answers we needed from the various the parts of the city that would oversee a project of that scale. The brewery in Chicago is right now, all built out, will have 1,200,000 barrels of capacity. Right now it's cooking along at just under 500,000 barrels, and we're starting the next expansion going into next year. So the idea is we come to engage with this community. We want to bring gifts to that community. We want to bring more value than we extract from the city. We're already going to bring burdens. We're going to bring traffic into a neighborhood. We're going to bring, the smells that will come out of the kettle during the boil. But in exchange for that, we want the city to kind of be a partner, and so they acted as that. And I mean, I have to say that the value that from the moment of that we first began the first concrete saw cut in a concrete floor, again, that was built to hold I-beams and stuff, so that concrete was 2 frickin' feet thick. When we start from the first moment of the first concrete saw cut, it was 11 months until the brewery was open. And because we had the support of the city and the way that we had it, the city was processing our permits and reviewing the drawings even as we were drilling piers, even as we were putting up steel, even as we were beginning to bring in equipment and upgrading the power capacity. And finally, when the city inspectors came to look at the place, 11 months, maybe 10 months into it, they walk in the building that all the lighting's been redone. There's a brewery in there. All the systems that we needed were built. And the inspectors looked at the guy who was leading the construction for me and said, "But you just got your permits like 7 days ago." and he's kind of a wry Greek fella. He just looked at him and he goes, "We work fast," you know. And they all just shrugged because they were given the orders from the city fathers to go in there, make sure this is right, look at it, and make sure it's right. This is not a prosecution. This is about getting a business installed in the city that'll make a difference. So, the conventional wisdom will lead everybody to looking at incentives and looking at stuff like that. But the value of declining it, in my mind, was worth twice the value of having accepted it in the first place. And beyond that, cities then expect, if you accept those things, you are somewhat beholden, right? You got to dance with who brung you. In this case, we were able to kind of be as independent as could be. Chicago is not like most places in California. It's a very, very union-intensive city. It's very old school in that way, and the unions matter. If you ask anybody that works down at the Irwindale plant in Los Angeles, at the Miller plant down there, you'll hear a story, because a couple of our people we hired came out of there. You'll hear a story of 13 different unions, each like pissing to mark their spot within the brewery. And it's not brewery employees that come and piss in the spot. It's the business agents that come in to make sure that their guys are taken care of, even if these guys over here are not. And so it would have the effect of tearing your business apart. So by being the way that we were, sorry about that, by being the way that we were with the city, we were able to set up a relationship with the city that allowed us to bring in a single union to organize the entire brewery. And myself, I'm a Teamster, 727 forever. And so we have a single union across the entire brewery, which was very upsetting to the other unions. If you can imagine, the hotel and restaurant workers, O1, they wanted all the people in the tap room to be them. The Boilermakers wanted theirs. The welders, the stationary engineers, the electricians, the brewers. You go down the list before you get to 13 breweries, or 13 unions. But instead, what we have is a single union that treats us with respect, and that we treat them with respect, and together we work to build a better organization. So all of these things, all of these unexpected benefits came out of that one moment in the mayor's office declining TIF grants. When it came to site search, again, I'm going to talk about conventional wisdom, because everything that I did in Chicago, I did pretty much against all conventional wisdom. You could hire a firm. When we announced that we were going to build the brewery, there right away I got a call from 5 or 6 smart guys who were going to we've done the work for this other brewery here. We did the work for and they were very satisfied with it. And when I look at what the cost of those breweries were, I felt that I couldn't afford to operate in that sort of a way. With $100 million to build a second facility. We built Chicago out to 500,000 barrels of capacity for $52 million, but that $52 million has the way paved. All we got to do is bring in brew houses and fermenters all the way to $1.2 million. So you might say the whole brewery is $70 million at 1,200,000 barrels of capacity. So the site search guys will want to walk you through all of the smart ways to approach cities, and that'll include TIF grants, and it'll include all the rest of it, but it'll also include an awful lot of front-loaded interests to satisfy the city in certain ways, or there's certain realtors that they might have relationships with, or they may prejudge certain neighborhoods as too dangerous or too edgy for your business to thrive in. I recommend you go do it yourself. Here's what I did. On a Monday morning, I went on to LoopNet. You sign up for a little subscription. All of a sudden, every frickin' commercial property in the entire city of Chicago is right there in front of me. And I spent about 2.5, 3 days and sorted out 20 buildings. So between LoopNet and Google Earth, so you can do a drive around through the neighborhood. You can see exactly what's going on. And in the neighborhood where I finally put the brewery, I did see one drug deal go on down the street on Google Earth. Because you know Google Earth's coming down the street, and you can see a car with the brake lights on at the end of the block, and then you go to the next, advance it to the next frame, and you see a guy walk out to the car door, and then you go to the next frame, and the Google car is getting close to him. They both turn around, look at you, and both drive off. But I also saw women pushing babies around in strollers all over the place. Again, you know, what more do you need to know to kind of just use your own common sense to make a site selection? So we picked out 20 buildings, or actually 21 buildings we wanted to see. I just put my finger up in the air, which way the wind blows. I called a realtor. The guy looked like an honest enough guy in his picture. He wasn't smiling at me. He didn't have on a nice suit. I called him up. He turned out to be the best realtor I think I could have called in the entire city of Chicago. We saw all of those buildings over the course of 2 days, and the first 20, none of them were acceptable. The 21st one I walked into the back of it, and the building was 6 acres. You could park 3 747s inside the building with the tails, which meant I could put up 50-foot fermenters inside of a building. Simple business. You don't need a lot of brain work to do it. And then you find out later that it's a challenged neighborhood. But then, by accident, you find out a little bit later that the hospital that's right at the end of the challenged neighborhood, the guy who founded it is the grandfather of the deputy mayor of the city. All of a sudden, all interests just continue to align in ways you would never have foreseen. So, leaving yourself open to chance and luck is material. It's not being careless. And when you start going down roads of conventional wisdom, you're going to end up with conventional outputs. And those conventional outputs are first, slow, second, expensive. And so we were able to bypass all of those. The idea we built the brewery ourselves because we didn't engage with one of these site selection companies that would also have provided the engineering expertise to do the site engineering and all of the power engineering and all of the utilities engineering around that. We were now on our own when it came time to build. And so I found one person who had built a bunch of grocery stores all over the city. He now works for the brewery full time. I found another guy who was a 28-year-old genius architect designer who didn't even have his own license in either of those disciplines, but he had an older friend of his who would stamp his drawings, who was a licensed architect, another structural engineer who would stamp his calculations. And the three of us just went about building the brewery. And again, it took us 11 months from the first concrete saw cut to the first bottling day. So don't sell yourself short. Now here's the big trade-off: is I had to kind of leave my wife and dogs behind in Petaluma and pretty much move to Chicago to get this done. And over the course of time, I really got to miss those dogs. So we did the build ourselves. So the person that owned this site is a fella, again, in the world of synchronicities, and we've been through a lot of very interesting kind of high level conversations over the last 8 or 9 months, and there was one attorney, a very smart guy that I got to like a lot, even though he's an attorney. And he told me the synchronicity in his experience of dealing with businesses and banks and beyond. He says synchronicity is God's way of remaining anonymous, and over time I've really come to believe that's true. So one of the big synchronicity in this whole thing was that there was a fella who had bought this Ryerson Steel, the Ryerson Steel site in Chicago, and he had founded a company in Toronto called Cinespace. And so when you watch movies, you look at the end, you see filmed in Toronto. If you watch credits like I do, you end up scratching your head, like who goes to Toronto to film movies? But this guy, he broke the mold, and he pulled movie productions one at a time out of Los Angeles up to Toronto. He got in an argument. You guys know Rob Ford. You remember he was in the news. He's the mayor of Toronto that was doing crack and who knows what else. And he got in an argument with Rob Ford over something and said, "That's it. We're pulling the business out of Toronto." And he built a second one in Chicago. So there's 4 buildings there, each of them 300,000 square feet. He's a smart fellow, though. He knew that that the movie business is cyclical, and so 3 of them he would put into movie production, and the 4th one he was trying to find a long-term industrial tenant who would provide cash flow routinely to to cover the movie studios, the sound stage's burn rate, whether it was a big season for movie production or not. And so we became that business. And then it turns out that this fella is this insane Greek billionaire. His name is Nick Merkopoulos. He moved to Toronto from Thessaloniki, Greece, when he was in his late teens. Finished up an electrical engineering degree and became the biggest contracting company in all of Canada. In fact, what he really became was like a mini Halliburton that nobody knew about. Most of his work was done for the CIA and the Pentagon. If you guys remember when we invaded Grenada, that little island down in the Caribbean, his company gets a call the next morning to go put everything back online because the Marines blew up the power station and the radio stations and all the rest of it. So he's a very, very smart, very, very cagey guy. And but he also built 3 Molson breweries in Canada, and one of them he even tore down. On top of everything else, before they tore it down, he rented it out to a guy who he didn't really understand why the guy wanted the brewery there outside of Ontario. And it turned out that the guy was taking the big rectangular fermentation tanks and growing marijuana in them. So when he Googles Lagunitas and finds a lot of marijuana in our story, he's completely sympathetic, So, but Nick Merkopoulos is a smart cat. One time I was sitting in his office and he calls up a friend to get a recommendation to West Point for a member of the city building department who'd done him a favor in another way. And that city building department sent his son over. Nick meets the son, says, sit down, calls me and Alex, his nephew, in. He says, watch this. And he calls, and the guy answers the phone as the guy goes, hello. And it's like, Nick says, you motherfucking cocksucker. I mean, it just rails at this guy, lets him have it. And the guy goes, Nick, you asshole motherfucker. And it's like, Colin, how are you? And it's like, it's Colin Powell is the guy he just called up. So that's the level, because he'd built a NORAD base in northern Canada when Colin Powell was lieutenant colonel, and that was his contact there. So you can imagine the contacts that Nick had from all the way from Colin Powell, all the way through the mayor's office, all the way through every part of the city, all the way to the governor's office, and these synergies, these accidental synchronicities would never happen if you hire one of these site selection companies, and if you get into the whole process of trying to build your brewery in a very conventional way. If you leave yourself, my experience is if you leave yourself open to luck, and I mean wide open to luck, luck has a way of paying you back. So anyway, it was 24 months from the moment of conception of the idea of the brewery, which occurred to me one morning driving into work. It was a rough day for other reasons, and I took the back roads in, and I got baked on the way in, and I'm starting to think. While I was standing in the shower that morning, my wife was talking to me. She handles all the trucking and logistics at the brewery, and I'm standing in the shower, and she's drying her hair, and she's complaining to me about the cost of getting a truck to Florida, and during harvest season you can't get refrigerated containers, and the price goes up to $8,000, and we don't make any money on beer if we ship it that way, and these bastards, this and that, it's going on. How many trucks are we shipping east a week? I mean, how big a problem is this for you? She says, 18 a week now. And I'm like, my God, how much does a truck like that cost? She goes, well, it can cost as little as $4,000, as much as $8,000, depending on the season. So I'm driving into work, and all these things are percolating their way down through my mind, and I just did a little bit of math in my head, and I'm like, wait a second, it's like, this is $150,000 a month. So I pull off the road, I find a Google mortgage calculator, I put in $150,000 as the price of the house, and it tells me I can borrow $30 million. I can build a brewery for what I'm spending on freight back to Chicago and points east. So very quickly, that became the MO. By the time I got into work, I told my CFO about it. Leon, a smart guy, very adventurous, but that news to him, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he started choking on his tongue. When we revived him, we agreed we'd call the bank next, and we called the bank, and once they revived the banker, he's like, if the numbers pencil out like that, we'll lend you the money. And with that, the deal was done. I mean, this is the best way of moving fast and lightly and quickly through the terrain. Again, not engaging every expert, not engaging every contractor, not engaging every consultant whose first inclination is to try to wring something out of you on the way to your new brewery, which you will get to that much more impoverished, that much more desperate to make it work. But there's no substitute. There's no substitute for distributed production. There's a reason why there's 12 AB plants in the country, and it's not just because they like building plants. They'd have built them all in St. Louis if it was the thing to do. Water is a very heavy thing to ship around. Those of you who from the brewing business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So why not use the local water? And frankly, you're going to find the water in the rest of the country is better water than what we get in California by a long shot. There's things that we were doing to our water in Petaluma for years, not knowing to make it more the way Lake Michigan is. So we get to Chicago, we're looking at the water chemistry. It's like we're not going to have to do anything here. And in fact, the beer tasted better, a little softer, a little nicer bitterness. And so immediately we had to up our game in Petaluma. So don't be afraid of building outside of your home territory. The myth of water here in California, the myth of water's importance to beer is burdened by the crummy quality of the water that we deal with. So that was the rationale for it, was the economics, and that penciled out. It paid for the whole thing. One of the wonderful things about building beyond the capacity that you think you're going to need or require on the first day is that you are set for expansion, which means that you can seize every opportunity that appears around you. You can seize opportunities to drive volume through certain chain stores that you might otherwise have steered away from. You can move into accounts or move into markets where you find accounts who might otherwise have been excited for you to have you there, but you're concerned about the constraints of your ability to supply your existing market. You know, there's a lot of thinking out there that there's too much capacity coming on in craft. When I look at the landscape out there, I see shitload of Shock Top and Blue Moon and now Red's Apple Ale and every other incarnation of something that sort of looks something like a craft beer. And what that stuff is, that's spackling in the cracks. That spackling is there for all of us to go chip out, and it'll come out of the cracks very easily because nobody's very attached to it. So when you think about, what's the most every brewery in the country, I bet, is operating within 80%, maybe even 100% of capacity every day. What's the likelihood that capacity and demand are 100% matched and everybody's at capacity? There's more demand out there than anybody knows about, and it's right now it's housed in those look-alike craft brands coming out of Bud Miller, Coors, and Anheuser-Busch. So don't be shy about going to get it. And what we did in Chicago is we built out only the first half of the brewery at the start. The infrastructure was laid for all the rest of it. Chicago has two 250-barrel brew houses sitting right alongside each other. We weren't shy. But I didn't have to buy that second $10 million brew house on the first day. All I had to do was make sure that the ground underneath it was ready and waiting for it to arrive. And we put little marks on the floor where all of the helical piers went into the ground. We surveyed it all so that when we knew we came in the brew house, we could put the tank right down. The legs had to be in exactly the right spot. Everything became plug and play. And as we speak, cellar number 2 is just finished being the groundwork laid for it, and there's space now there to lay another 85 750 barrel fermenters and a handful of 300s and 600s. So when you build in that way, the real estate that you're going to hold it's a call option on every bit of your future. Don't be shy about paying too much rent, because it's just there waiting for you to take it. If all of your money if all the available cash is soaked up in debt and those other things, you won't be able to carry this excess capacity space that you're going to need so badly. And then the company becomes a better machine when you open up that second brewery. When you're operating your brewery now, and I sensed this, but I wasn't sure to what extent it turned out to be true. There's a lot of communication that goes on across the parking lot, from hallway to hallway, a lot of information that gets sort of handled in very colloquial ways. When you put up that second brewery, you start to realize how little of what you have is actually proceduralized. And the accountability, everything from, are people showing up on time? Are the time clocks actually even working? When they don't work in the brewery that you're in, somebody walks the 100 feet from the time clock to the boss's office and says, hey, time clock's not working. You can't do that when you're 2,500 miles away. Instead, you end up with morale problems and employees who are upset. When it comes to knowing that the schedule that's being executed there meets the schedule that was expected, you can't just do that by walking up and down the hallway. So what it starts to do is it starts to proceduralize your business, and all of a sudden things become very sort of lockstep. And what that sets you up to do is build the third brewery. I mean, if you have 2 dogs, the third dog is no big deal, you know? When you only have one dog and now you got two, it's like, oh God, twice of everything. It's twice as much work. The third one gets a lot easier, and that's so when we pushed the button a few months ago on moving forward with the Azusa project, there was very little consternation anywhere in the business. When I told my senior people in Petaluma that we were going to build one in Chicago, like I said, they choked on their tongues and passed out. And so the change that building that second facility brings to your business is monstrous, and it's valuable, and it brings a deeper understanding of what it is that you're actually doing all day. And it also reveals all the gaps. It reveals the gaps in personnel. Now you can't get along anymore with one HR person because they have to, even if they don't have an assistant here, they need to have an assistant there. And first you think you can get along with the personnel being handled, over the telephone and stuff, and it just doesn't work. But all of these things are about growing up, I mean, I remember when I first moved out of the house, my parents' house, how surprised I was to find out that long distance phone calls actually cost money. But growing up is like that. So this has brought us, getting the second brewery up and running, has brought us to the end of, I like to think of it as the end of our startup period. Once that place was up and running, now the business, there's a drawstring around the whole thing. We understood ourselves better than we ever did before. We understood our supply chain better than we ever had to before. Everything is just, there's a robustness and a confidence that comes with that opportunity. And then, so the last thing, I want to leave, a minute for someone to ask a question if you felt like it's 25 after now, but Azusa will be up by early 2017. The same bit of kind of synchronicities appeared with that. We went looking all over the western United States for water. Petaluma will run out of capacity about early 2017. I really can't expand it beyond that point just because of real estate problems. And so we knew we had to build a second one. We were looking up in Pacific Northwest where we felt like it rained more. It turns out that the most secure water in all of the West Coast is in the little town of Azusa, and there's a reason why the Miller built their plant there, right at the base of the San Gabriel, San Gabriel Canyon, Azusa Canyon, San Gabriel River, and then we go look there, and it turns out there's a chemical plant that was torn down about a year ago. The Superfund site all cleaned up, and there was a company building 300,000 square feet of building right there. One of them big enough to house 2 brew houses, filtration and fermentation. One of them perfect for a packaging room. One of them perfect for a refrigerated warehouse. 300,000 square feet is what we have in Chicago. It's what we'll have in Los Angeles. Everything was perfect. We rent all of our buildings, by the way. There's always an inclination to buy and to own, to control. The truth is, if you can get a 10-year lease with 5 options, who the hell cares? It's a better use of your capital to put it towards equipment, towards feet on the street, towards long-term contracts for raw materials, the things that really matter most to your business, and let somebody else be in the real estate business. So anyway, Azusa will be renting, and that's my story. So it looks like a lot of people gathered around. Thank you all for the hang. Didn't even get a sip of my own beer. Were there any questions? Yeah. To accepting the cash? Well, you dance with who brung you. He's asking me, is there any other downsides to accepting cash from a municipality? You dance with who brung you. I mean, you can follow along in the news. You can see, to some extent, you end up beholden to. Well, so you have to pay the cash back. But you would find I'm sorry, any other downsides to not accepting the cash, right? Well, you don't have the cash, right? I mean, but this is where I believe it's important for businesses to chew their own food. For us all as brewers to take the risks, for us to sell those risks to banks who will look at our cash flow and see that we run our businesses in ways that generate sufficient cash flow coverage, and you go borrow it. I mean, if you're borrowing $50 million, what's the difference? What does another $10 million really make? It might mean that you won't drive a Lamborghini as soon as you wanted to. But outside I got my Jeep Wrangler parked. I'm pretty happy with that. So it's like you're always paying it forward. But the thing you buy is your independence, and there's nothing more valuable than that. They do have control over you, yeah. Because once the people's money is involved, there's expectations of certain ideas about the bidding process and how the build will happen and who gets a piece of it. And if you're in a city like Chicago, there's a lot of people that have pieces of the politicians, so they expect a piece of anything the politician hands out. Like I said, it's all about independence and just, like I said, chewing your own food. So, any other quick? Yeah, you got to yell. I'm sorry.
So what can you tell us about the Heineken deal?
You know, most of the reporting out there, the real media outlets, they got it exactly right. It's the Heineken is purchasing a 50% stake in Lagunitas. It's as simple as that. Here's what this produces. It produces, number one, I mean, you know, the headline is it produces a liquidity event for me and all of my shareholders. And these are people who've been sitting on, you know, an investment, the money they'd lent me back in 1998 with zero return except cases of beer on their birthdays and when they had barbecues and stuff for all of those years. Very, 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 very trusting. But you know, everything has its limits. The business gets big. You will feel the same pressure at some point if you succeed with your business, that they want to start to see something coming back because they can see that the company is certainly feeding itself. So that's a real thing. I'm 55. You know, I mean, you know, it's like, you know, if you what's the movie? Rumblefish. You know, there's a scene where Tom Waits is cleaning the table and he goes, you know, when you're young, you can do anything. You're gonna live forever. And then one day you look up and you realize you got what 20 good summers left. And you start thinking about it. It's not ephemera. You know, and so it's like, well, you know, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? You know, I want to do something fucking exciting. And the business itself is exactly that. And so I want to see the world. You know, the things we all have done here in the United States, it's lighting up the beer communities all around the world. And why not go out there and participate with it? So there's the headline thing of the liquidity, but you know what? We were able to kind of wait long enough that I got the value of the business so high that we only had to sell half of it in order for it to change everybody's lives. What could be better than that? I mean, my investors are a retired school teacher, my veterinarian. I told you I got 2 dogs. You know, a dentist, a designer friend of mine. I mean, these are just folks, you know, who had 50 grand in the bank that they took a chance on giving to me. So this is nothing. This feels better than anything in the whole world to do that. But we only had to kind of trade half of the company for that. But when I began this process, I told myself that the first thing that would matter most, the primary consideration, was structure. And if I could get the structure that I wanted, then all of my employees would have careers with opportunities that would have been otherwise undreamt of before that. That the company would have a trajectory into the future, the brand, and if I'm lucky, when I'm cold and, you know, pushing up the daisies myself, my name will somehow be out there in the world, still prevailing. I mean, legacy is a great thing. And so I wanted to do something that had enough imagination to it that I could set a 50-year growth scene for everybody that works for the business. I don't expect to be 105. So it means that I think that long beyond my duration here, the business is going to have growth opportunities. And if in the United States, the whole of the United States becomes like Portland and Seattle, for instance, where we're still growing up there, but we're growing at 10 and 15%, and we're not growing at 30 and 40% because it's just crowded. There's a lot of players up there and a lot of people doing good work. So what happens when the whole country becomes like that? Well, so Lagunitas, at some point down the road here, like most of us, will get pushed down to single-digit growth because it's just crowded. But I'm going to be selling beer in Belarus. We're going to be having a great time in Mongolia. You know, they have 23 brewing facilities in India. The opportunities now that the road is paved to the future. The most interesting, so that's primary with structure. Secondary, in order to achieve that structure, we would exchange some equity. So somebody that says that you have nothing invested, have said to me, I have nothing invested in a joint venture. I moved half the equity of my business into this. That's a lot of money, and it's a lot of value. And in exchange for that equity, money would come to us. So money was tertiary. And I'll say that till the day I drop off. The money was good, and what the money showed me, though, more than anything else, was the duration of the vision that the partner had for the investment. If they were only willing to pay a small chunk, it means they needed to make it pay on the next quarterly analyst call. If somebody like Heineken came in with a big number, it meant they were looking 10 and 15 and 20 years out. They were looking, the senior people there, they're looking beyond the time of their own careers. You know, and so money is tertiary. It's important. So's the equity, so's the structure. But structure was primary, and we achieved everything we wanted to get in this. And this will change nothing for us at all in the United States. We might work with Heineken USA on some national account calls. I don't know. You know, that could happen. But that was never part of the discussion. The discussion was Mexico, Argentina. You know, their 2 biggest markets are Vietnam and Nigeria. I mean, what does it take to go to market in Nigeria? I can't wait to find out. I mean, this is exciting now, you know. I feel like I'm starting the brewery over again. And we still own half the company. And so somebody said, well, what happens if one of your shareholders sells one share? Now it's not 50-50 anymore. Just for what it's worth, there's a thing, all of the existing shares are held in something, an LLC called a founder's vehicle. And none of the people within the existing shareholders can trade a single one of their shares. But in exchange for signing on to the founder's vehicle, they get this special dividend, which is the payout from the proceeds of the sale of 50%. So this is something that's never been done before, and it's not like any other deal that's happened in craft yet. There may be lots more like this. I hope it's a paradigm, because what it does is it gives the craft brewery just a friction-free surface to move forward into parts of the world that are already thirsty for what we're all doing here on the West Coast. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much. Thanks. And cheers to you all, and to Tom McCormick and the CSBA for putting this on.
Good job, Tony. Thanks, Tony. The Brewing Network.